Go on, pull that blanket a little higher. Settle in. Adjust your pillow one last time, letting it cradle your head in a perfect state of engineered comfort. Feel the soft, even, and almost unnoticeable warmth that surrounds you, the quiet hum of a world built from the ground up for your well-being. You are safe. You are warm. You are, in this very moment, experiencing a degree of effortless luxury so profound, so utterly unattainable for the vast majority of human history, that to your ancestors it would be indistinguishable from divine magic. It is a quiet miracle you inhabit every single night. Now, I want you to listen. Listen intently. Listen past the quiet, reassuring hum of your refrigerator or the gentle, rhythmic sigh of your home's heating system. Try to hear a different sound, an echo from a distant time. It is the sound of a wind that does not whisper, but howls, a starving, predatory wolf of a wind, a gale that has teeth and claws, a wind that is, at this very moment, scraping and clawing against the unyielding stone walls of a fortress. The year is 1320. Inside that fortress, a man not so very different from you is desperately trying to sleep. But he is not enveloped in gentle, consistent warmth. He is a soldier in a war he can never truly win, locked in a nightly life or death struggle with an insidious enemy that has already invaded his home, his room, and is now attempting to invade his very bed. The enemy is the cold. It is not merely an absence of heat, it is a presence. A cold so absolute, so cruelly penetrating, that he can clearly see his own breath plume in the suffocating darkness before his face. A ghostly testament to the life force the night is trying to steal from him. He's not just uncomfortable. He is in mortal danger. Between the years 1100 and 1500, a period spanning the height of the castle-building era, historians and archaeologists estimate that nearly half of all medieval castle residents, from the loftiest silk-clad lord to the lowliest tunic-wearing servant, experienced interior temperatures so low that seeing their own breath indoors while sleeping was a common and remarkable occurrence. Their homes, their mighty, intimidating castles, were not the shelters from the cold we imagine them to be. They were, in fact, prisons of it. They were gigantic, refrigerated stone boxes, marvels of military engineering that were, simultaneously, catastrophic failures of thermal design. Their thick walls, a brilliant defense against a besieging army, acted as immense thermal sponges, drawing in the winter chill like a magnet, holding it for days on end, and then relentlessly radiating it throughout every single chamber. While we might reach for a sweater or complain on social media when our smart thermostat dips below a comfortable 68 degrees Fahrenheit 20°C, these people face the very real, tangible, and terrifying possibility of simply not waking up, of freezing to death in the supposed safety of their own beds. How was this possible? How did anyone survive sleeping in a world utterly devoid of central heating, without a shred of modern insulation, without even the basic concept of a thermally sealed window? How did they wage their nightly war against the deadly, bone-deep cold? Night after freezing night, for months on end. Tonight, we are not just going to learn about their struggle. We are going to travel there. We are going to inhabit their world. We are going to feel the chill on our own skin. So get comfortable. I mean it. Sink deeper into that warmth, wrap that blanket tighter, because where we are going, you are going to need every last memory of what it feels like to be truly warm. We are about to pull back the heavy, frost-covered curtains on one of history's most brutal, underappreciated, and remarkably ingenious tales of human survival. Welcome to the frozen nights of the medieval castle. Your eyes flutter open, but they register nothing but a void. It's a profound, ink-black darkness, the kind that feels heavy and substantial, like a thick, damp blanket smothering the world. For a fleeting, terrifying second, you are utterly lost. A disembodied consciousness adrift in a sea of complete disorientation. Where are you? And more importantly, when are you? Then, the awareness hits you. It doesn't arrive as a thought, but as a deep, physical sensation that seems to bypass your skin and settle directly into your bones. It is a cold so deep, so gnawing and ancient, that it feels as if it is emanating from the very marrow of your skeleton, an internal chill that no amount of external warmth could ever hope to touch. The year, you remember with a jolt, is 1320. You are Lord William, Master of Warwick Castle, and you have just woken up in the heart of a merciless, unrelenting English winter. The first breath you draw is a physical shock, an involuntary gasp. The frigid air is not just cold, it is sharp and crystalline, like inhaling a blade of freshly shattered ice that seems to burn and scour your lungs. And as you exhale, you see it. A ghostly white cloud, the vapor of your own life force made visible, hanging in the air for a moment before dissipating into the oppressive gloom. This isn't the minor, almost invigorating inconvenience of a chilly modern morning. This is a hostile, active presence. This is the kind of cold that weakens the body, invites sickness, and, if given the chance, ultimately kills. God's teeth. It's freezing, a voice mutters from the far corner of the expansive chamber. It's your young servant, Thomas, his slender silhouette barely visible against the faint, dying orange glow of the room's single hearth. The fire, your chamber's only source of manufactured heat, effectively died hours ago, surrendering to the overwhelming thermal power of the stone around it. Thomas's fingers, you can see, are stiff and clumsy with cold as he fumbles with a piece of flint and steel. The sharp, metallic clink of his efforts echoes unnaturally in the frozen silence of the room. He's trying to coax a spark onto a piece of dry tinder, a small, desperate act of defiance against an enemy that holds the entire castle in its grip. You are living inside the belly of your enemy. The very thing that defines your home, your power, your fortress, is the source of this unending misery. Stone, the same material that made your castle a magnificent instrument of defense. A symbol of power that could withstand a season-long siege, also made it an absolutely abysmal instrument of basic human comfort. It is a cruel, fundamental paradox of your existence. Stone, you know, is the perfect material to stop the heavy projectile from a trebuchet or to repel a determined scaling party. But it is also a thermal sponge of terrifying efficiency. We are not talking about the thin, decorative stone veneers of a future world suburban home. A visiting master mason from Normandy, a man renowned for his knowledge of fortifications, once proudly explained to you that the outer walls of Warwick are, in some places, a full 10 feet thick. 10 feet of solid, dense, and forgiving rock that spends all day soaking up the freezing temperatures from the hostile outside world, and then holds that cold for days, for weeks. Like a malevolent memory, stone doesn't just let the cold in, it actively conspires with it, becoming a loyal and powerful ally. It is a giant, slow-motion cold battery. All day long, it absorbs the winter chill from the wind, the rain, the snow. All night long, it radiates that stored chill directly into your living quarters. It is a slow, silent, and incredibly effective thermal assault, relentlessly stealing any meager warmth you and your household manage to create. With a surge of pure willpower, you force yourself to sit up, the simple act sending a cascade of shivers through your body. You swing your legs out from under the heavy pile of furs and wool that cover your bed, and your bare feet make contact with the stone floor. The shock is immediate, electric, and violent. It is like stepping onto a freshly frozen lake. A sharp, crystalline pain shoots up your legs, and you wince, clenching your jaw against the agony. It is a brutal, daily welcome to your medieval morning. And, as is often the case, it is about to get worse. A frantic, heavy pounding suddenly rattles the thick, iron-strapped oak door of your chamber, the sound jarring in the pre-dawn stillness. My lord, my lord. The guard on the eastern wall reports riders approaching. 3 of them, moving fast. And just like that, any small pocket of residual warmth you've managed to preserve in the cocoon of your bed overnight must be immediately and utterly abandoned. Duty calls. Because that is the fundamental, inescapable truth of your life in this castle. These monumental structures were built for one primary, all-encompassing purpose: war. Comfort was a distant, almost frivolous afterthought, a luxury to be considered only after every possible defensive measure had been taken. The architects and designers who built these fortresses had a single, overriding priority that informed every single choice they made: do not get murdered by invaders. The simple human need to stay warm was tragically low on their list of concerns, somewhere far below impressive-looking towers, defensible gatehouses with multiple murder holes, and good, Clear sightlines for your archers. Every single architectural feature designed for defense has become a gaping and pluggable vulnerability in your nightly war against the cold. Those narrow arrow slits, or meurtriers, carved through the thick walls, so perfect for allowing a crossbowman to loose a bolt at an enemy with minimal exposure, were also perfect. Whizzing conduits for freezing drafts that snake their way through the rooms like icy, invisible serpents. Those majestic, high, vaulted ceilings in the Great Hall, designed to lend an air of grandeur and to allow the immense volume of smoke from the central hearth to rise and escape through a louvered opening in the roof, also created massive, cavernous spaces that were utterly impossible to heat. A traveling scholar from Padua, a man obsessed with mathematics and volume, once calculated for you that the Great Hall at Warwick could comfortably fit 3 of the largest merchant houses from London inside it. How, he had asked rhetorically, do you heat a space of that magnitude with just wood and coal? The simple, stark answer is, you don't. You just learn to accept being cold as a permanent state of being from the first frost of October to the last thaw of April. The very layout of the castle itself seems almost maliciously designed to amplify and channel the cold. The elegant spiral staircases, the most efficient and defensible way to build stairs within the confines of a thick stone tower, also function as perfect vertical wind tunnels, eagerly channeling drafts from one level to the next with brutal, chilling efficiency. The central courtyard, or bailey, an open space absolutely essential for mustering troops, training horses, and housing vital supplies, also acts as a giant funnel, allowing wind, rain, and snow to pour directly into the very heart of the castle, ensuring that even the most interior rooms are never truly safe from the elements. And then, of course, there were the windows. If you were exceptionally wealthy, a high-ranking noble like yourself, you might have the astonishing luxury of actual glass in a few of your most important rooms: the Great Hall, the solar, the chapel. But this glass was not the perfectly clear, seamless material of a future age. It was a crude, uneven, bubbly substance, often tinged with green or brown, set in a lattice of lead frames that did very little to stop the insidious drafts. For the vast majority of windows in the castle, the covering was not glass at all, but something far less effective. It might be a set of heavy, ill-fitting wooden shutters, which, when closed, plunged the room into a disorienting, claustrophobic darkness. Or, more commonly, it was oiled parchment or thin, scraped sheets of animal horn, stretched taut across a wooden frame. These materials were translucent at best, letting in a dim, yellowish, deeply depressing light, while keeping out only the worst of the wind. They offered virtually zero insulation. You might as well have had an open hole in the wall. My own grandfather served at Windsor Castle itself. Your blacksmith, a man whose family had worked iron for your own for generations, told you just last month while repairing the hinges on a heavy munitions chest. He said that even in the king's private chambers, there were drafts so strong and so constant that they could blow out a tall candle from 10 paces away. The image is a powerful one. If the King of England himself, in his greatest fortress, could not escape the tyranny of the cold, what possible hope was there for anyone else? Your own bedchamber is a prime, and particularly cruel, example of this paradox. It is situated in the highest room of the main tower, the most prestigious and defensible location in the entire castle, affording you a commanding view of the surrounding lands and a necessary degree of privacy from the bustling life of the household below. It sounds romantic, the stuff of songs and poems, doesn't it? The reality is anything but. Your prestigious tower room is, for all intents and purposes, a medieval refrigerator. Heat, as everyone knows, rises. But your tower juts out defiantly from the main building, meaning it is surrounded by the howling, freezing air on 3, and sometimes 4 sides. It is a cold sink, a stone cage suspended in the heart of the winter wind, leaching heat from your body with merciless efficiency. Let me paint you a clearer, more detailed picture. Imagine the tower room at Kenilworth Castle, a fortress renowned for its grandeur, in the dead of a January night. The interior faces of the stone walls are literally sweating with condensation, the moisture freezing into a thin, crystalline film of ice in the corners of the room. The magnificent, Expensive tapestries that cover the walls depicting heroic battle scenes and costing a fortune are not just for decoration, they are a desperate attempt at insulation. And yet, they are visibly moving, rippling and swaying like ghostly flags in the constant, invisible wind that seeps through the mortar between the massive stones. The heavy iron hinges and latches on the chamber door are so cold that they feel sticky and slick to the touch, and could peel the skin from your bare hand if you held on for too long. This wasn't the depiction of squalor or poverty. This was the lived reality of luxury living in medieval England. You know what the real killer is, though, my lord, a castle guide. A man with decades of experience within these walls once told a visiting dignitary from France, "It's not the cold itself, it's the dampness." It wasn't just a dry, crisp, invigorating cold. It was a wet, penetrating, insidious cold. The kind that seems to seep into your joints and your bones and never truly leaves. Medieval castles, for obvious defensive reasons, were almost always built near a significant source of water or river to be crossed by a single, defensible bridge, a lake to protect one flank, a deep, man-made moat. This strategic necessity meant that fog, mist, and perpetually damp air were constant companions for more than half the year. Stone, being porous, eagerly absorbs this moisture. And that moisture made the cold 1,000 times more effective, 1,000 times more miserable. It created a bone-deep, damp chill that made everything feel perpetually wet to the touch: your clothes, your bedding, your hair, even the wooden handle of your eating knife at the dinner table. This was the inescapable reality you woke up to every single day for half the year. Floors of cold and forgiving stone that felt like sheets of ice beneath your feet. Walls that radiated a relentless, energy-sapping chill. Drafts strong enough to make the flames of candles and torches dance wildly, casting frantic, distorted shadows on the walls. Damp air that made everything feel clammy, miserable, and vaguely mildewed. And, to compound it all, the crushing, psychological weight of the winter nights, which stretched on for 14, sometimes 16, seemingly endless hours. It was the perfect recipe for sickness, for misery, for rheumatism, and for the quiet, creeping death of hypothermia. You're wondering how anyone survived, aren't you? An elderly monk from a nearby abbey, a man who had dedicated 50 years of his life to studying and transcribing historical accounts of daily life, once said to you during a visit, "It is the question that haunts all who study this era." And the honest, unadorned answer is, my lord, that not everyone did. Winter deaths were as common and expected as the harvest in autumn. The cold was a scythe, and it took the very young, whose bodies were too small to fight it, and the very old, whose bodies were too weary first. So why, modern mind screams, didn't they just build warmer castles? It is a logical, almost unavoidable question. The answer lies in a completely different, and far more brutal, set of priorities. They were fighting a different, more immediate war than we are. Their primary, all-consuming, day-to-day concern was staying alive in a violent, and stable, and unpredictable world, a world where your neighbor, a man with whom you might have shared a cup of wine just last month, might suddenly decide that your fertile lands and strong fortress would look much better flying his family's banner. Thick stone walls kept out arrows, resisted the fire of siege warfare, and blunted the force of the mightiest siege engines. The cold was a secondary enemy. A miserable, dangerous, and sometimes lethal enemy, to be sure, but it was an enemy that couldn't storm your gates with a battering ram or put your keep to the torch. Your wife, Lady Isabel, a pragmatic and resilient woman, appears at the doorway, a heavy woolen shawl pulled so tightly around her shoulders that her knuckles are white. Despite the early hour, she is already fully dressed in multiple, carefully chosen layers of wool and linen. The eastern storage room is freezing over again, William, she says, her voice heavy with a familiar winter resignation. The apple barrels are solid as rocks. You nod, a cold knot tightening in your stomach. It is the same battle every single winter. The food stores, so painstakingly gathered during the autumn harvest, begin to freeze solid. This means that much of the precious produce will turn to a spoiled, inedible mush when it eventually thaws. It is a constant, gnawing worry in a long, wearying list of winter concerns. Send 3 of the strongest men to move the barrels closer to the kitchen wall, my lady. You command, your voice still hoarse and gruff from sleep and the cold air. And pray it is not already too late. The kitchen, it was, in many ways, the beating heart of the castle during winter. It was often one of the only genuinely, reliably warm places in the entire sprawling complex. The massive fires required for roasting, baking, and boiling burned nearly all day, every day, making it a true haven of warmth. A sanctuary from the tyranny of the stone. Which is precisely why, as we will soon see, the sleeping arrangements for the vast majority of the castle's 150 inhabitants were nothing like what you might expect. The morning light, weak, gray, and utterly devoid of warmth, struggles to penetrate the old parchment covering your chamber window. It casts a dim, yellowish, almost sickly glow across the room, illuminating the still visible plume of your breath, a constant, taunting reminder of the enemy that lives within your very walls. Now, here is where the story truly begins to shift, because surviving these unimaginable conditions wasn't just a matter of grim, stoic endurance. That alone would not have been enough. It required an entire, complex system of accumulated knowledge, of clever techniques, of meticulously practiced daily rituals that modern people have almost completely forgotten. Do not ever make the mistake of thinking your ancestors were stupid, my lord. The old monk had advised you. They were resourceful as hell. They had to be. Their very lives depended on it. Stupidity was a luxury they simply could not afford, and he was absolutely right. The men and women who lived, worked, and died inside these frozen stone fortresses developed a series of remarkably effective, and often brilliant, strategies for staying alive. These were strategies that differed dramatically depending on your station and status within the rigid castle hierarchy. For you, as the lord and master, there were certain undeniable advantages and luxuries. But even with all of your accumulated privileges, the winter nights were a pitched, personal battle between life and a cold so intense, so invasive, that it could literally stop your heart while you slept. So, how did they do it? How did they cheat death night after freezing night? The answer is a fascinating, intricate tapestry woven from threads of heated rocks, ingenious bed designs, strategic sharing of body heat, and the dedicated labor of specialized servants whose only job was to keep you from freezing to death in your sleep. Your steward, a loyal and efficient man named Godfrey, appears at your chamber door, his face tired but his demeanor as dutiful as ever. My lord, he says, his own breath pluming in the frigid air, a mirror of your own. Shall I instruct the servants to have the bed warmed again tonight with the heated stones? I must inform you, we are running dangerously low on proper, seasoned firewood. You pull your furs tighter around your shoulders, the cold already beginning to seep back into your bones now that you are out of bed. You nod grimly, the weight of your responsibilities settling upon you. Double the stones tonight. Godfrey, Winter's teeth are sharper than I have known them in many years. He bows his head and retreats, his mind already a flurry of calculations and logistical puzzles. How to allocate the dwindling fuel. How to keep a household of over 150 souls from freezing for yet another night. Because that is what life in this castle was really about. Not the grand feasts and glittering tournaments of songs and stories, but the grim, relentless, day-to-day business of survival. One freezing, perilous night at a time. The heavy, iron-strapped oak door to your bedchamber creaks open, the sound of the hinges groaning in protest against the cold. A blast of damp, even colder air rushes in from the corridor beyond, a palpable reminder of the frigid, labyrinthine passages that make up the arteries of your stone fortress. To servants, a man and a boy, enter the chamber, their movements careful, practiced, and full of a quiet, focused reverence. They carry a peculiar and wonderful object between them, something that looks like a giant, long-handled metal frying pan, but crafted from polished brass that gleams in the flickering torchlight. Nestled inside its deep, covered basin are not eggs or bacon, but a thick, vibrant bed of glowing, red-hot coals, pulsing with a life-giving heat that has been carefully scavenged from the main kitchen fire. Located 3 floors below in the castle's belly, this is not the morning's breakfast being prepared. This is a vital piece of nightly theater. This is the crucial difference between surviving the long, dark hours ahead and succumbing to them. Mind the embers, boy. Be steady now, snaps the older servant, a man named Giles, to his young, nervous assistant. A single spark on these fine linens, and the whole chamber will go up in flames faster than you can say a Hail Mary. He is not exaggerating in the slightest. The tool they are so carefully manipulating, known as a warming pan, is, in essence, a controlled, mobile fire hazard on a long stick. Yet in the brutal, pragmatic calculus of a medieval winter, the potential risk of a catastrophic fire was deemed far preferable to the absolute certainty of the lethal, creeping cold. This dangerous, brilliant, and utterly essential tool was considered a masterpiece of household technology. Welcome to the medieval noble's bedroom. I urge you to forget, just for a moment, the romantic tapestries depicting chivalrous knights and the ornate, hand-carved wooden chests. What you are truly looking at is perhaps the most sophisticated and vital personal survival system in the entire castle. Every single element within this room, from its fundamental architectural design to its most luxurious and expensive materials, has been engineered over centuries for a single, desperate purpose: keeping the human bodies within it warm enough to wake up alive the next morning. Let's begin our examination with the magnificent centerpiece of the room, the four-poster bed. This iconic, almost mythical piece of furniture was not created as a mere status symbol, nor was it designed simply because it looked fancy or offered a sense of grandeur and privacy. It was, in its very essence, a medieval life support system. It was a fortress within a fortress, a sanctuary against the cold that raged just inches away. Observe the curtains, my lord. Your ever-present steward, Godfrey, might explain, gesturing with a proud sweep of his hand toward the thick, heavy drapes of deep crimson wool, lined with rabbit fur, that hang from the bed's ornate wooden frame. These are not for modesty or privacy, though they do afford both. They are for survival. He is speaking the absolute and varnished truth. The four-poster bed, with its complete set of heavy, wraparound curtains, was, in effect, a custom-built tent erected inside a freezing, drafty room. Once you had climbed into its embrace, and those thick curtains were drawn fully shut, you have created an independent microclimate. It was a tiny, enclosed, and defensible space where your own precious body heat, along with any other heat sources you could muster, could actually begin to warm the small volume of surrounding air, rather than instantly dissipating into the vast, freezing, high-ceilinged expanse of the chamber. Without those essential curtains, any heat your body generated would simply rise straight up to the cold, distant ceiling and be lost forever. The enclosed bed trapped that vital warmth precisely where you needed it most, surrounding your sleeping form. It was a masterpiece of practical, intuitive thermal engineering, developed over countless chilly nights. Notice, too, the significant height at which the bed itself sits off the ground. The mattress is positioned, sometimes 3, even 4 feet up, often requiring a small, 2-step stool to comfortably climb into it. This, again, was not for show or for elevating one's status. It was a strategic, life-saving position. Cold air is denser and heavier than warm air, and at night it sinks, pulling near the floor in a thick, invisible, and dangerous layer of misery. The height matters a great deal, my lord, Godfrey would explain, tapping a finger on the solid oak frame. Up here, you might be a full 5, perhaps even 6 degrees warmer than if you were to sleep on a simple pallet on the floor. 6 degrees might not sound like much to a man in a temperate world, but when the ambient temperature of the room is hovering near freezing, that small difference is the very margin between a restless, shivering night and the insidious onset of a fatal hypothermia. Now, let us turn our attention to what you are actually sleeping on. The mattress itself is yet another marvel of medieval ingenuity and resourcefulness. The foundation of the bed is not a solid wooden platform or a set of slats, which would trap dampness. Instead, it is a cleverly designed lattice of thick, taut ropes, meticulously stretched and woven across the sturdy wooden frame. This was the original box spring, providing both support and crucial ventilation. These ropes required regular, vigorous tightening to prevent the sleeper from sagging into a deep, In comfortable trough during the night, you must instruct your man to turn the crank twice a week, my lord, or you will find yourself sleeping in a hammock by month's end, advises your wife's senior ladies. Maid, demonstrating to a new servant how a special, lever-like key is used to wrench the ropes to the correct tension. This very practical, twice-weekly chore is the direct origin of the comforting phrase we still use today without a second thought, sleep tight. On top of this expertly tightened rope lattice sits the mattress itself. And if you are lucky enough, privileged enough, to be a member of the high nobility, yours is not stuffed with common straw or coarse horsehair. It is stuffed, from corner to corner, with feathers. Goose down, to be precise. You sleep upon a thick, luxurious, and incredibly expensive featherbed, a comfort that costs more than a full year's wages for a common laborer or a man-at-arms. The feathers were gathered from geese across 3 different counties, my lord, and took to seasons to collect. Godfrey says with an air of immense pride, this extravagance wasn't just about soft comfort. The densely packed feathers made the featherbed a vastly superior insulator to any other material, protecting your body from the cold air that would inevitably rise from the floor below, while also conforming perfectly to your shape to eliminate any potential cold air pockets. Beneath your body, you would have a single sheet of fine, if slightly coarse, linen. But unlike the modern arrangement of bedding, you would not typically have a sheet on top of you. That was a later invention, a refinement for a warmer world. Instead, you would be covered by a carefully arranged mountain of layers. First, several thick, heavy, and slightly scratchy woolen blankets. Wool, as medieval people knew better than anyone, retains its insulating properties even when damp, a critically important quality in these perpetually moist environments. And then, the ultimate luxury, the final and most effective barrier against the cold furs. Thick, heavy pelts of bearskin, wolf, or most commonly, dozens of sheepskins with the soft, curly wool still on. You must instruct the servants to layer the furs with the wool side down, toward your body. The lady's maid instructs a new girl with the patient air of a master craftsman. It is a common mistake to do it the other way, for show. But the wool traps the heat best when it is closest to the skin. As you watch this nightly ritual unfold, you see the servants moving, with the focused precision of a team of modern surgeons preparing for a complex operation. The warming pan is still at work, being slid carefully and continuously between the layers of bedding. The process is slow and laborious, sometimes taking up to half an hour. The goal is to fold, and equally vital first, to drive out the deep, penetrating chill from the core of the mattress and the heavy blankets, and second, just as importantly, to force out the ever-present, insidious dampness. Press your hand here, in the middle, girl, the head servant, Giles, instructs a younger maid, directing her to the center of the vast featherbed. Does it feel even slightly cool or wet to the touch? If it does, you keep warming. Do not stop until it is bone dry. Remember this, nothing will kill a sleeping lord faster than a damp bed in the heart of winter. He is absolutely right. Dampness was the silent, invisible killer in these castles. A damp bed in freezing temperatures was a direct and efficient route to sickness, lung ailments, and death, as it would leach precious warmth from a sleeping body at an alarming and unstoppable rate. While the critical work of the warming pan continues, other preparations are underway. Another servant, moving with practiced care, approaches the bed with several large, and several layers of thick, coarse cloth. These aren't just any old river rocks, gathered at random. They are often soapstone or granite, specially selected over generations for their remarkable ability to absorb and retain heat for an exceptionally long time. These primitive but highly effective heat accumulators are placed strategically at the foot of the bed, tucked deep under the layers of blankets. These stones will stay warm right through until morning, my lord, the servant says, carefully positioning one. But be mindful of your feet on them in the night. They have been known to burn the toes of many a noble who shifts in his sleep. And still, there is more. A small, ornate metal brazier, filled with a carefully measured amount of glowing, low-smoke charcoal, might be positioned in a safe corner of the room, near the bed but not dangerously close. The risk of fire or noxious fumes from the charcoal was a constant concern, but the small amount of ambient, radiant heat it provided could raise the room's temperature by a few crucial degrees. In the most luxurious and wealthy castles, this brazier might burn fragrant, specially selected woods like applewood, or even expensive imported incense, to help mask the ever-present medieval smells of wood smoke, damp stone mildew, and unwashed bodies. We also cannot forget the more personal and targeted heating device, the foot warmer. This was typically a small wooden or metal box, often intricately carved or pierced with decorative patterns, with a hinged lid and small handles. Inside this box, a small, fireproof container filled with hot coals would be placed. This clever device would then be positioned directly under the covers at the very foot of the bed, creating a concentrated, blissful pocket of intense warmth for your perpetually freezing feet. The Countess of Warwick, a distant and famously frail cousin, lost 2 of her toes to severe frostbite during the previous winter. Her personal physician had been forced to amputate them with a hot knife. The gruesome tale is still whispered among the servants. A grim and effective cautionary tale that ensures they never neglect their bed-warming duties. This elaborate ritual wasn't just about comfort, it was about preventing actual, permanent physical harm. Now comes another crucial, and far more pleasant, part of the bedtime preparation: a hot, fortifying drink. Servant arrives bearing a steaming, ornate silver cup. "Mulled wine, my lord," he announces, spiced with cinnamon and cloves from the east. This wasn't just a pleasant, relaxing nightcap. While medieval people had no scientific understanding of the fact that alcohol actually lowers a person's core body temperature in the long run by dilating blood vessels, they knew intimately of its immediate and powerful effect. It created a wonderful, spreading sensation of warmth. Furthermore, the spices, according to the prevailing medical theories of the day based on the 4 humors, were themselves believed to have inherent warming properties that would help balance the body against the cold and wet humors of winter. Whether scientifically valid or not, the immense psychological comfort of consuming something hot, sweet, and fragrant before climbing into a cold bed should never be underestimated. With the bed finally and perfectly prepared, it is time for you to get ready for sleep. And it is here that medieval bedtime rituals diverge most dramatically from our own modern practices. First, you would not change into a cozy, specialized set of clothing like pajamas or a nightgown. Those were not common until much, much later. Instead, most medieval nobles, both men and women, actually slept completely naked, or at best in a simple, thin, and often sleeveless linen undergarment known as a shift. Naked. In these freezing temperatures, you had once asked a visiting, worldly-wise historian from a monastery in France. "It seems utterly counterintuitive, does it not?" he had replied with a knowing smile. "But it makes perfect, logical sense when you consider the full system at play. Skin-to-skin contact, you see, was far warmer and more efficient at transferring heat when one was sharing a bed. Furthermore, any clothes worn to bed could potentially trap dampness from sweat against the body, which, as we all know, is an incredibly dangerous and unhealthy condition in winter. Speaking of sharing, beds were very rarely occupied by just one person. Even the lord and lady of the castle would almost certainly sleep together every single night of the winter, not just for reasons of marital affection, but for the vital, life-sustaining warmth generated by 2 human bodies lying in close proximity. In particularly cold and brutal weather, it was not at all unheard of for a trusted servant of the same gender, a manservant for the lord, a lady's maid for the lady, to sleep on a smaller pallet or even at the very foot of the noble's bed, adding another crucial human radiator to the carefully constructed microclimate. The historical records show that the Duchess of Norfolk had 3 of her favorite ladies-in-waiting sleep in her own bed during the Great Winter of 1408. The French historian had explained. 1 slept at her feet, and 1 on either side of her. This was considered a great honor, a sign of immense trust and favor, not an imposition or an indignity. Body heat was a precious, life-sustaining resource in medieval winters, far too valuable to be squandered on the modern, and frankly rather strange, notions of absolute privacy and personal sleeping space. Now, with the bed warmed to perfection, the hot stones radiating their gentle heat, and the curtains ready to be drawn, there is one last, absolutely crucial element to your medieval bedroom survival kit, the nightcap. And I do not mean the alcoholic drink. You must always cover your head, my lord, advises your loyal manservant, Thomas, offering you a soft, whereupon woolen cap. As my grandmother always said, you lose most of your body's precious heat right through your skull. While the specific percentage of heat lost through the head has been a subject of debate by modern science, the fundamental principle is absolutely sound. An uncovered head in a cold environment leads to significant and rapid heat loss. Medieval people understood this intuitively and rarely, if ever, went to bed without some form of warm head covering during the long winter months. Finally, you settle into the vast bed. The servants move to the four corners and, in a synchronized, practiced motion, draw the heavy velvet curtains fully shut, enclosing you in your warm, dark fabric cocoon. The transformation is immediate and truly remarkable. The incessant sounds of the wind howling outside the stone walls are instantly muffled to a distant, almost comforting murmur. The insidious, probing drafts are completely gone. Inside this small, enclosed space, it is noticeably, blessedly warmer already, as your own body heat begins to effectively warm the small, contained pocket of air. The hot stones, tucked deep at the foot of the bed, radiate a gentle, persistent warmth that slowly seeps up your legs. The bed, elevated high above the cold floor, has been meticulously dried and pre-warmed by the glowing coals of the warming pan. The multiple, heavy layers of wool and fur blankets above you are trapping your body heat with incredible efficiency, as your body continues to slowly and steadily warm this small, enclosed space. The temperature becomes, if not exactly comfortable by the unimaginable standards of a future world, then at least, and most importantly, survivable. Will there be anything else, my lord? Asks the servant Giles, his voice a disembodied, respectful sound from somewhere beyond the thick crimson curtain. No, Giles. That will be all. See that the main fire is banked properly for the morning. This is another key, and often overlooked, element of nighttime survival. Banking the fire, the act of carefully covering the glowing embers of the hearth with a thick, insulating layer of ash, would dramatically slow its burn, keeping the precious embers alive, but dormant, until morning. This meant that the fire could be quickly and easily revived at dawn with a simple puff from a bellows, without the arduous, frustrating, and sometimes impossible task of starting a completely new fire from scratch in freezing conditions with cold numb fingers. As the servants leave your chamber, taking the expensive and precious candles with them to be extinguished and saved for the next evening. Another fire hazard and a significant household expense, you are left in a near total, almost unnerving darkness, enclosed and protected within your fabric survival pod. The only sounds that penetrate your sanctuary are the distant, muted howl of the wind, the occasional soft pop and hiss from the dying, banked fire in the hearth, and perhaps, if you listen closely, the faint and settling scurrying of mice or rats in the ancient walls of your stone fortress. Inside your curtained fortress bed, you are relatively safe, relatively warm, and likely to survive the night. But what about everyone else in the castle? What about the lady's maid, who is at this moment curling up on a low, curtainless trundle bed, a simple frame on wheels that is pushed under your own grand bed during the day to save space? She benefits from the room's dying fire, certainly, but she has no curtains of her own to trap her body heat. What about the loyal knights and men-at-arms, sleeping on straw pellets in the drafty barracks? What about the humble stable hands, sleeping in the haylofts above the great war horses? And what about the dozens upon dozens of other servants who make the complex machinery of your castle run smoothly every single day? Their survival strategies were dramatically different from your own, born of necessity rather than luxury. And so, tragically, were their chances of actually making it through the night. When the gray, cold morning finally arrives, the temperature inside your stone chamber will be at its absolute lowest point. The fire will be little more than a pile of warm gray ash. The massive stone walls will have been radiating their deep, penetrating cold for 16 uninterrupted, brutal hours. This is, and always will be, the most dangerous time of the night. They are just before dawn when the human body's core temperature is naturally at its lowest point after a long period of rest. The first servant to enter your chamber in the morning, Thomas, will bring not just a fresh log for the rekindled fire, but the day's news from the rest of the castle. And often, in the depths of winter, that news was grim. Old Walter, the guard on the north tower, didn't wake this morning, my lord, he might report, his voice quiet and matter-of-fact. They found him stiff in the guard room an hour ago. Deaths from the cold, what a future age would call hypothermia, were tragically common enough in medieval winters to barely warrant more than a passing somber mention in the daily running of the castle. As you finally emerge from your warm, curtained sleeping fortress into the biting, shocking cold of the chamber, you are once again reminded of a fundamental truth of your existence: survival, not comfort, was the primary and all-consuming goal of medieval bedroom design. Your magnificent bed was not just a piece of furniture, it was your nightly refuge, your personal lifeboat in a world where the cold was an active, malevolent force that was constantly trying to kill you. But to truly understand the full scope of the ingenuity and the resilience of medieval castle dwellers, we must now leave the relative luxury of the Lord's chamber. We must venture down the cold, winding stairs, through the drafty corridors, and into the chaotic, communal world of the servants, where survival required even more creative, far more desperate, and deeply communal solutions to the same deadly problem. The kitchen at night was a world entirely unto itself. By day, it was a controlled, chaotic symphony of intense heat, billowing steam, and a constant, deafening noise: the clang of heavy iron pots, the sharp, percussive rhythm of chopping knives, the furious shouting of orders, and the continuous, hungry sizzle of meat roasting on a massive, man-powered spit. But as the last rays of sunlight vanished, and the castle's nobles retreated to the privileged seclusion of their private chambers, the kitchen underwent a profound transformation. The fires were banked, the work slowed, and the vast, stone-floored room became something else entirely: a sanctuary, a fiercely contested refuge, and the vibrant, beating heart of a complex and desperate social ecosystem built around a single, primal, all-consuming need: warmth. While you, the lord of the castle, settled into your curtained, fur-lined four-poster bed, meticulously attended by a retinue of servants bearing heated stones and brass warming pans, the vast majority of your castle's staff faced their own nightly battle against the same killing cold. Their weapons, however, were not velvet curtains or expensive down feather beds. Their weapons were proximity, shared ingenuity, and, most importantly, the simple, life-sustaining warmth of each other's bodies. "The best spots, lad, are right here, behind the bread ovens," whispers Meg, a sharp-eyed, weary kitchen maid who has survived 12 harsh winters within these very walls. She is speaking to the new scullery boy, a terrified-looking child of no more than 10 who arrived from a distant village just last week. He is shivering violently, his thin, worn wool tunic offering almost no protection against the ambient chill of the room. "The stone there," she continues, pointing with her chin, "it stays warm right through till morning. It's worth putting up with the extra mice. Believe me, she is not wrong." The massive, igloo-shaped stone bread ovens, built directly into the thickest part of the kitchen walls, were the thermal heart of the servants' world. After a full day of roaring fires and baking hundreds of loaves of bread, the thick layers of stone and clay had absorbed a tremendous amount of heat, which they then radiated back out slowly, steadily, and blessedly all through the long, freezing night. The small, coveted patch of floor space directly behind these ovens was, without a doubt, the most valuable real estate in the entire castle for anyone who did not have a private chamber with their own hearth. It was the prime sleeping territory, a prize that was fought over not with swords or fists, but with a complex and unforgiving system of subtle servant hierarchies, quiet, long-standing alliances, and a web of unspoken, ironclad rules. "See that one, Martin," she warns, nodding her head toward a burly, sour-faced man who is stirring a final, bubbling pot of pottage with a ladle the size of his head. "He will break your fingers clean off if you even think about putting your palate in his spot. He's been sleeping there since long before you were even born, boy." The lived reality of servant life in a medieval castle completely shatters our modern, romanticized conceptions of a home. There were no designated servants' quarters with neat little beds arranged in orderly rows, as often depicted in films. For the vast majority of the lower-ranking staff, the kitchen maids like Nag, the scullery boys like our newcomer, the laundry workers, the brewers, the countless stable hands. There were no bedrooms at all. There were only sleeping spots. And those spots were almost always temporary, deeply communal, and dictated by the single, ruthless, and unforgiving physics of heat. The Great Hall, that majestic, high-ceilinged heart of the castle's formal activity during the day, transformed at night into a massive, sprawling, and chaotic dormitory. After the lord and his family had retired up the grand staircase, the servants would begin the nightly ritual of unrolling their meager bedding, typically a thin, lumpy sack stuffed with straw, known as a pallet, or for the less fortunate, just a simple woolen mat onto the cold, rush-strewn stone floor. They would naturally cluster as close as possible to the great central hearth, which would be carefully banked by the senior servants to hold its precious embers through the night. But do not for a moment picture neat, orderly, and quiet rows of sleeping servants. The reality was far more chaotic, far more crowded, and frankly, far more intimate than we can easily imagine. Surviving court records from the year 1340 mention a formal complaint lodged by the steward of a large castle, stating that 43 servants were now sleeping in a hall that was originally built to comfortably house 30. They were described in the document with a tone of bureaucratic frustration as being piled one on top of the other like so many sacks of grain. This was not just a simple case of overcrowding, it was a deliberate, if uncomfortable, survival strategy. A single, healthy human body generates a surprising and significant amount of heat. In the brutal and forgiving cold of a medieval castle, that heat was a resource far too precious to be squandered on then unheard of luxuries like personal space, modesty, or privacy. They slept just like a litter of newborn puppies. A modern-day tour guide at Bodiam Castle, a man who has spent a lifetime studying its history, once explained with a vividness that stuck with his listeners, all tangled up together in great heaps. The cold would kill you right quick if you got too proud about having your own personal space. And like our deeply ingrained modern sensibilities about personal bubbles and the sanctity of individual space, medieval servants understood a fundamental, life-saving truth. Body heat was a communal resource, to be shared for the good of all. Sleeping huddled together in close physical contact wasn't just normal, it was an absolute necessity for survival. An elderly woman, interviewed in the 1920s as part of a project to record oral histories, whose own grandmother had been a castle servant in the late 18th century, recalled the stories that had been passed down through her family. Grandma said they'd sleep 10 or 12 all in a great cluster, head to foot, foot to head, all in a right angle. The youngest ones, the little scullery boys and such, were always pushed into the very middle of the pile, because that's where it stayed warmest all night. This ancient practice of group sleeping for warmth was so common and so accepted that it even had its own formal terminology in official documents. The Latin phrase dormire servitim, which literally translates to sleep in a heap or to sleep piled up, appears with surprising frequency in medieval household account books and records, acknowledging the practice as a standard and remarkable and necessary operating procedure. But do not mistake this for a democracy. Not all servants were equal in this nightly struggle for survival. A rigid and often cruel hierarchy existed, even in the arrangement of their sleeping bodies. "I've been here 6 years, and I'm still sleeping by the main door," grumbles a thin, perpetually coughing man who is carrying a final, heavy load of firewood into the great hall. The draft that snakes its way from under the massive oak door is a relentless, icy torment. "I reckon I need to marry a woman who sleeps near the kitchen wall. It's my only hope." He is only half joking. A good, warm sleeping position was so incredibly valuable that it could genuinely factor into the complex social dynamics of the servant class, including friendships, rivalries, and even marital considerations. A warm spot could mean the difference between a night of relative comfort and a night of constant, shivering suffering. It could be the difference between robust health and a winter cough that could fester and turn deadly in the lungs, sometimes, quite literally. It was the difference between life and death. 1. Directly against the kitchen walls, especially those stone walls that backed the massive bread ovens. This was the undisputed prime real estate. 2. Near, but not dangerously near, the Great Hall's central hearth. Too close and you risked being showered with sparks from a popping log. Too far away and you felt no heat at all. 3. Inside the laundry rooms, where the massive cauldrons of water that had been heated for washing all day had left a deep, residual warmth in the surrounding stones and floor. 4. In the brewery, where the subtle but constant chemical heat generated by the process of fermentation made the air a few precious degrees warmer than anywhere else. 5. In the lofts directly above the stables, where the collective body heat of dozens of large animals, particularly the great war horses, would rise through the wooden floors, creating a surprisingly warm and insulated environment, albeit a smelly one. The head cook, old Master Giles. He gets the cozy corner by the spice cabinet, Mag explains to the wide-eyed new boy, pointing to a pallet that is clearly more substantial, thicker, and better positioned than any of the others. He's been here 30 years. He has a real feather pillow and everything. Stole it from a guest chamber years ago, so they say. Status in the servant world was not just measured by your daily job, your title, or the wages you were paid. In winter, it was most powerfully and visibly measured by where you were permitted to lay your head at night. As for the bedding itself, it served as a stark, daily reminder of the harsh inequality of castle life. While the lord and his lady enjoyed deep, soft down feather beds and sheets of fine, smooth linen, the servants made do with whatever they could get. At the very best, it was a pallet or rough burlap sack that they themselves had stuffed with straw from the stables. But often, it was stuffed with whatever insulating material could be scrounged, scraps of wool from the weaving room, clumps of coarse horsehair, handfuls of dried moss, or even fragrant, pest-repelling herbs. I put lavender and mint in mine, says a young laundry maid proudly to her friend. It helps keep the fleas away. Mostly, fleas, lice, bedbugs, and the ever-present mice and rats were unwelcome but utterly inevitable bedfellows. This communal sleeping, while absolutely necessary for generating warmth, had obvious and dangerous downsides in terms of basic hygiene and the rapid and stoppable transmission of disease. Surviving court records from Winchester Castle in the 15th century note a sudden and virulent outbreak of winter fever, likely influenza or typhus, that killed 8 servants in the space of a week, all of whom, it was noted, slept in the same crowded corner of the Great Hall. Once illness entered one of these sleeping heaps, it could spread like wildfire, but the alternative, the prospect of sleeping alone in the vast and forgiving cold, was almost always seen as the greater and more immediate risk. Hypothermia killed more quickly, and far more certainly, than most of the contagions of the age. As we continue to follow Mag through her well-worn evening routine, we see another ingenious survival tactic that was unique to the servant class, a highly strategic form of clothing management. You never, ever take off all your clothes, lad. She advises the new scullery boy with the stern authority of a general. You wear everything you own, all the time. You might take off your muddy outer layer for your work during the day, but you put it right back on for sleeping at night. And like the nobles, who, in the protected warmth of their curtained beds, often slept naked, the servants typically slept fully clothed. They effectively used their own day clothes as additional layers of blankets rather than removing them. Some of the more cautious or experienced servants even slept in their shoes, a practice that served a dual purpose, partly for the small amount of extra warmth it provided, and partly because a good, sturdy pair of leather shoes was an incredibly valuable possession that could easily be stolen in the darkness of the crowded hall. My great-grandmother told me they'd sleep with their shoes tied to their belts with a bit of twine, the woman from the 1920s Oral History Project had recalled. To lose your shoes in the middle of winter, you might as well just go and cut your own throat. You wouldn't last a week. Well, the nobles had elaborate warming pans and specially selected hot stones prepared for them by others. The servants, out of necessity, developed their own simpler, but no less effective, improvised heating methods. See this. Mag shows the new boy a smooth, rounded, and fire-blackened stone about the size of a small loaf of bread. You find a good one like this, and you keep it. You put it in the hot ashes when the day's baking is done. When it's time for sleep, you fish it out with a stick, wrap it in some old rags so it doesn't scorch you, and you keep it at your feet. You'll thank me for this later, I promise you. These improvised bed warmers were a critical piece of personal technology for the servant class. Smooth stones, discarded bricks from the builder's yard, even simple cloth bags filled with sand would be heated in the kitchen fires and then carried carefully to their sleeping spots, where they were often shared between several people to maximize their benefit. My sister and I, we shared one brick between us all winter, says a young scullery maid, scrubbing furiously at a large, soot-covered pot. We took turns putting it at our feet. When it cooled down after a few hours, we'd hug it to our chests to get the last little bit of warmth out of it. The coldest night the elderly had cook, Mag's formidable superior, could remember was the feast of St. Lucy, some 30 years back. It had been a night of bitter, windless cold, so deep it felt as if the world itself had stopped breathing. We found 3 of the new kitchen boys dead by morning, she says, her voice low and heavy with the memory. Lying right next to each other, they were as blue as the woad dye the women use. Just didn't have enough fat on their bones to fight it. After that terrible night, the old Lord, God rest his soul, allowed us an extra ration of charcoal for the kitchen hearth every December, no matter what it cost. Death from the cold was tragically common enough that most long-serving castle servants had witnessed it firsthand. It was a constant, lurking presence that shaped their behavior, their intricate social structures, and their nightly routines in ways that we, in our warm and comfortable world, can barely begin to comprehend. They even developed their own folk wisdom, a set of practical diagnostic signs for recognizing when someone was beginning to succumb to the deadly cold. You watch out if someone gets too quiet, Mag tells the new boy, her expression deadly serious as she imparts this life-saving piece of information. If they stop shivering, and they start smiling and saying they feel wonderfully warm all of a sudden, you don't wait. You run and wake the cook. Immediately, that's the frost sleep starting, and you don't have much time once it begins. What she is describing, in her own practical, non-scientific terms, is the well-documented phenomenon of paradoxical undressing and the terminal mental confusion that often precedes death from severe hypothermia. They recognize the lethal signs with chilling accuracy, without needing to understand the complex physiology behind them, and they had their own emergency protocols, their own form of medieval CPR for the freezing. You strip them bare, the head cook explains in a matter-of-fact tone when asked what is to be done. You find the 2 biggest, strongest, warmest men you can, and you put the freezing one skin to skin right between them. Then you pile every blanket and cloak you can find on top of all 3 of them. It works more often than not, if you catch it early enough. This desperate, intimate, emergency sharing of body heat was a life-saving technique employed without a moment's embarrassment or hesitation. Survival, raw and simple, trumped all other social concerns. As the last of the evening chores are completed, the kitchen finally grows quiet. The servants begin to settle onto their pallets in their practiced, intricate formations. The oldest and the youngest are gently but firmly pushed toward the protected center of the sleeping huddles. Bedding is arranged, shared, and tucked in with practiced hands. Bodies pressed together without self-consciousness, sharing the only reliable, self-generating heat source they have, each other. Good night to you all, and may God keep you warm, murmurs the cook from her privileged spot by the spice cabinet. It is the traditional, heartfelt servant's blessing in the long winter months. In the deep darkness of the hall, someone, a young woman perhaps, begins to hum softly. It is an old, familiar, and achingly beautiful tune about the coming of spring, about blooming flowers and warm, gentle sunshine. A few other voices, tired and quiet, join in, weaving a simple, hopeful harmony against the mournful sound of the wind howling and battering against the kitchen walls. This, too, is a vital part of their survival. But not everyone in the castle has the luxury of sleep, or even the comfort of huddling with their fellows, far beyond the relative warmth and safety of the kitchen, through the long, dark, and drafty stone corridors, and high up on the exposed, windswept ramparts of the castle walls. Another group is waging their own, far more lonely and desperate battle against the cold. They are the Night Watchmen, and they stand their solitary vigil, facing the full and tame fury of the winter darkness entirely alone. Their story is perhaps the most extreme and harrowing testament to the limits of medieval cold endurance. "Pity the poor bastards on the wall tonight," mutters a voice in the darkness of the kitchen, and as we leave the servants to their uneasy, communal, and deeply human sleep, we know that even their hard and precarious circumstances were a form of profound privilege. Compared to what the night guards had to endure every single night, the wind on the castle walls is not merely wind. It is a living, malevolent entity. It doesn't just blow, it hunts. It is a predator made of pure, kinetic cold, and its hunting ground is the high, exposed stone walkways of your fortress. It relentlessly searches for any gap in your clothing, any exposed inch of skin on your face, any weakness in your resolve. It claws at your cloak with invisible talons, it bites at your cheeks with teeth of ice, and it steals your precious, life-sustaining body heat faster than you can possibly hope to generate it. For the Night Watchmen of a medieval castle, this wind was both a constant companion and a mortal enemy during the long, freezing, and terrifyingly lonely hours of their nightly duty. "The third watch, that's the worst of them," mutters Edwin, a grizzled, sour-faced veteran of 15 brutal winters spent on these very walls. His voice is a low, gravelly rasp, barely audible over the high-pitched, mournful shriek of the wind as it whips around the stone merlons of the battlements. It's the coldest, darkest time of the night, that hour just before the dawn. It's the devil's hour. Men die on the third watch. He is not exaggerating for the benefit of the new recruit beside him. He is stating a simple, well-known fact of his profession, while the lord of the castle slept soundly, cocooned in his curtained fortress of fabric and fur, and while the servants huddled together in the relative, communal warmth of the kitchen and great hall, the night watchmen faced the full and tamed fury of the winter darkness entirely alone, in the most exposed and dangerous parts of the castle, with almost no meaningful protection from the killing cold. "I found young Aldred, frozen solid, right where you're standing now, last winter," Edwin says, his voice devoid of emotion as he points to a specific flagstone with the butt of his spear. He was still standing upright. He was leaning on his spear just so, with his eyes wide open, staring out at the darkness. Looked like a statue made of ice. He didn't even fall over when he died. The young guard beside him, a boy of 19 named Watt, who still has the soft and lined face of a farmer, swallows hard. The sound is loud and dry in his own ears. It is his first winter on the walls, and the grim, cautionary stories he has been told by the older guards are already chilling him more profoundly than the biting wind. He is beginning to understand a terrible truth. The cold kills far more watchmen than enemy arrows ever did. The fundamental job of a castle night watchman was brutally, deceptively simple: stay awake, stay alert, watch the surrounding lands for any sign of approaching danger, and be ready to sound the alarm if anything suspicious appeared. But to accomplish this simple task in winter conditions that could, and often did, literally freeze a man to death where he stood was anything but simple. It was an act of profound and often fatal endurance. Their only shelter from the elements was the cold, indifferent stone of the battlements themselves, thick walls that were, by this point in the night, radiating the deep, penetrating, energy-sapping cold like gigantic bricks of ice. The stone, it steals your warmth right through the soles of your boots, Edwin explains, his feet engaged in a constant, rhythmic, and endless shuffling dance on the walkway. You stand still for too long, just for a minute or two, and you'll feel it sucking the very life right out of you. You try to move again, and your feet feel like they're made of lead. Stand still for longer than that, and you'll never move again. He demonstrates the watchman's walk, a technique passed down from one generation of guards to the next. It is a constant, shuffling, almost hypnotic movement, a slight shifting of weight from foot to foot, a slow, deliberate pacing of a three-step pattern back and forth, a periodic, vigorous swinging of the arms against the torso. This was not mere restlessness or boredom. It was a conscious and vital survival technique, keeping the blood flowing to the vulnerable Extremities was the only way to prevent the onset of debilitating, flesh-killing frostbite. You never stop moving, lad. He instructs Watt, his eyes scanning the dark, empty horizon. Not for a second. Even if you're bone-tired, even if your legs ache so much you want to weep. Up here, movement is what keeps you alive. The night was typically divided into 3 or 4 watches, depending on the castle's size and the perceived level of threat. Each watch would last anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. 4 long hours in the relative comfort of summer, a merciful 2 hours in the brutal depths of winter. That small reduction in time was the Lord's only concession to the deadly conditions. But even 2 hours, 120 minutes, could feel like an eternity, and could easily be a death sentence if you weren't properly prepared, or if your luck simply ran out. The clothing of a night watchman was his primary, and often only, defense against the cold, but it was a tragically thin and inadequate armor against such a relentless enemy. Let's take a closer look at what Watt, our young recruit, is wearing on this freezing, windswept night. He has on everything he owns in the world. First, a single layer of thin, coarse linen undergarments, covering his body from neck to ankle. Over that, he wears 2 thick, slightly greasy woolen tunics, the outer one a darker color to blend in with the night. He has on thick woolen hose and separate leggings, tied tightly to his belt. His feet are clad in sturdy leather boots, which he has stuffed with straw in a desperate attempt to add a bit of extra insulation and to fill the gaps where the leather has worn thin. Over all of this is a single, heavy woolen cloak, its edges already stiff and crusted with a fine layer of frost. A simple woolen cap is pulled down tight over his ears. He has no gloves. Gloves are for lords and rich merchants, Edwin says with a snort of derision, holding up his own bare, reddened hands for Watt to see. The knuckles are swollen and cracked, the skin a patchwork of old scars and raw, weeping chilblains. You can't feel the alarm bell rope proper with gloves on. You can't get a good, firm grip on the hilt of your sword when you need it in a hurry. This was the deadly, inescapable paradox of their job. They needed the maximum possible protection from the elements, but they also had to maintain full combat readiness and manual dexterity at a moment's notice. Their hands and their feet, the parts of the body most vulnerable to the cold, almost always paid the terrible price for this compromise. Here's the trick, lad. You listen close now, Edwin says, his tone becoming that of a master teaching his apprentice a vital secret of their craft. He holds his raw, swollen hands up to the meager, flickering light of a single, sheltered torch that has been wedged between 2 stones. Every quarter of an hour, you take a look at your fingers. If you can't feel them much, but they're still good and red, that's fine. That's just normal winter hands. But if you start to see little white, waxy patches appearing on the tips, that's trouble starting. That's the frost getting its teeth into you. And if they start to turn black, well, lad, if they start to turn black, you can say your goodbyes to them, because you'll be losing them come the spring. This was the practical, brutal, and life-saving knowledge of frostbite symptoms, passed down not in medical textbooks, but in hushed, urgent whispers from veteran guards to terrified newcomers. But clothing and folk wisdom alone were never enough. The guards developed a whole arsenal of additional strategies to survive the killing cold of their lonely night watches. Edwin pulls a small, worn leather flask from deep inside his tunic, where it has been kept warm by his body heat. Pepper ale, he says, taking a small, cautious sip before offering it to Watt. It burns the throat something fierce, but it warms the belly, and most importantly, it doesn't dull the senses and make you sleepy like wine does. The castle steward issued each man a single, small flask at the start of his watch. They were expected to return it empty at the end of their shift, a clever and somewhat cruel way to ensure they didn't drink it all at once at the beginning and leave themselves with nothing for the coldest hours. These various warming drinks were not just for comfort. They were essential survival tools. Small braziers or firepots, filled with glowing charcoal, were sometimes allowed at strategic, sheltered points along the battlements, but they were a deeply mixed blessing. A fire makes you a perfect target, Edwin says, nodding his head grimly toward a small, earthenware pot of coals that is sputtering and hissing in a sheltered corner of the wall. It throws a nice little light, sure, but it also shows any enemy scout with half an eye exactly where you're standing. And the light, it ruins your night vision. You take one step away from it, and you're as blind as a newborn kitten for a good 5 minutes. That's 5 minutes where a man could be scaling the wall right beneath you, and you'd never see him. Even worse, the stark, jarring contrast between the fire's intense heat and the freezing ambient air was physically dangerous in itself. You warm your hands at the coals until they're nice and toasty, Edwin warns, and then you go and grab your cold iron spear shaft. The skin will stick to it like glue, and when you pull away, it'll tear right off. I've seen it happen. Better to stay evenly cold all over than to go back and forth between hot and cold. The deepest, most profound challenge, however, was the isolation, and like the servants, who could generate a massive amount of collective warmth by huddling together. The guards were denied this most basic and effective of all cold fighting strategies. They're sacred. Duty required them to be spread out along the walls, to face in different directions, to cover all possible angles of approach. The practical requirements of their job prevented them from sharing body heat. This essential isolation made their personal struggle against the cold particularly acute. A one-on-one battle between a single, vulnerable human body and the infinite, merciless cold of the night. My feet. I don't think my feet have been truly warm from November to March in 15 years, Edwin says, his voice a matter-of-fact, emotionless statement. You just get used to it, or you die. As the night deepens and the second watch gives way to the dreaded third, the temperature plummets even further. Watt's breath now hangs in thick, instantaneous clouds before his face. The metal of his spearhead has become so intensely cold that it is physically painful to touch, even through the thick wool of his sleeve. The seductive, treacherous pull of cold-induced sleep begins its final, most powerful assault. His eyelids grow impossibly heavy. His thoughts become slow, thick, and sluggish, like treacle. The vicious, biting cold no longer feels so bitter. In fact, a strange, pleasant, and deeply deceptive warmth seems to be spreading through his limbs, a feeling of peaceful release. He thinks, just for a moment, that he might sit down, just for a second, and rest his eyes. What? Edwin's sharp, explosive voice and a stinging, open-handed slap across his face bring him back to a shocking, painful reality with a violent jolt. Your eyes were closing, lad. You were drifting. Talk to me. Right now, count the stars if you have to, but you talk to me. What? Dazed and shivering, was experiencing the dangerous, final euphoria that so often precedes freezing to death, the body's last, fatal, and tragically peaceful surrender to the overwhelming cold. The danger isn't feeling cold, lad. You listen to me now, Edwin explains, his voice urgent, his grip like iron on Watt's arm. The danger is when you stop feeling the cold, when the shivering stops, when the pain goes away, and a great, wonderful warmth seems to come from nowhere. That's not a miracle from God. That's death himself, wrapping his own cold cloak around you to lead you away. This practical, hard-won knowledge of the stages of hypothermia, gained through brutal, direct experience rather than through the reading of medical texts, was the most vital piece of survival information that could be passed from a veteran guard to a novice. It was a lesson in how to recognize the face of your own impending death. The psychological challenges of the night watch were every bit as formidable as the physical ones. The profound isolation, the oppressive darkness, and the constant, grinding physical discomfort created a mental battlefield that claimed almost as many victims as the cold itself. The mind, it plays tricks on you up here in the cold and the dark, Edwin says, squinting his eyes at a distant, shifting shadow that is probably just a windswept tree. You start to see things that aren't there. You hear voices whispering in the wind. Cold-induced hallucinations were common enough to have their own slang terms among the medieval guards: frostvis, ions, or winter's whispers. The constant, nerve-wracking challenge was to distinguish between these dangerous, cold-born delusions and a real, approaching threat. The hours crawl by, each minute a small, painful victory. Finally, their replacements arrive, their faces grim and set as they prepare for their own two-hour battle with the elements. Made it through another one, Edwin says with a quiet, gruff satisfaction as they finally descend the winding stone stairs toward the relative warmth and safety of the castle interior. Another night we cheated the Reaper. This was how success was measured on the winter watch, not by enemies spotted or alarms raised, but simply by the act of survival until the changing of the guard. Their destination is the kitchen, where the earliest of the servants are already starting the day's fires. By ancient and sacred tradition, the night watchmen are given a privilege that is earned through their immense suffering, first claim to the warmth of the newly lit kitchen hearth. "Stand back now, give them room," orders the head cook, shooing away other curious servants as Edwin and Watt, stiff and ghost-like, approach the growing, beautiful fire. The nightmen get the flames first. That's the rule, as Watt stands before the magnificent, life-giving flames, and excruciating, throbbing pain begins to erupt in his half-frozen hands and feet as the blood and feeling return. It is the pure, unadulterated agony of survival. He has passed his first terrible test. He has survived his first deep winter night on the walls. But as he finally collapses onto his thin straw pallet in the corner of the crowded guards' quarters, too exhausted even to attempt to remove his frozen boots, he knows with a dreadful, chilling certainty that winter is long, and the night, with all its terrors, will come again, and again, and again. The winter of the year 1395 was different. It did not arrive as a seasonal guest, however unwelcome. It arrived as a conquering, occupying army. It was a winter that would be remembered and spoken of in hushed, fearful tones for generations to come. It was remembered not merely as the coldest winter in living memory, though it certainly qualified for that grim title, but as the winter that simply refused to die. March, the month of the expected thaw, came and went with no relief, bringing instead more blizzards and deeper frosts. April, the month of new life, arrived with fresh, heavy snows that buried the castle grounds anew. By early May, when the surrounding fields should have been vibrant green with new shoots of wheat and the trees should have been bursting with leaf, a thick, stubborn crust of ice still formed on the castle moat each and every morning. We came to call it the endless winter, reads a shaky, weary entry in the Warwick Castle steward's personal account book. The provisions that were meant to last for a comfortable 3 months were stretched, through God's grace and brutal rationing, to 5. And I tell you now, God's mercy alone prevented us from being forced to eat the dogs. An extreme, unrelenting winter like this one pushed the castle's inhabitants far beyond their normal, well-practiced, and usually effective survival strategies. When the bitter cold persisted not for weeks, but for months beyond all expectation. When the carefully managed woodpiles dwindled to nothing but frozen splinters, and the once bountiful food stores became perilously, terrifyingly low, that is when a true and profound desperation began to set in. And with that desperation came the implementation of the winter protocols, the castle's brutal, last-ditch, and rarely spoken of calculations of pure survival. My lord, the last of the coal store is down to 1/4 of a sack, reports Godfrey the steward, his face, once plump and rosy, now pale, gaunt, and drawn. The main woodpile will not last 3 more days at our current rate of use. The foraging parties found nothing but frozen ground. The lord of the castle, William, huddled near the great hall's now much smaller fire, wrapped in every layer of fur he possesses, nods grimly. He has been expecting this terrible news for weeks, dreading its arrival. Implement the full protocols, Godfrey, he says, his voice a low, cracked whisper, and may God have mercy on our souls and forgive us for what we must do. The first, most immediate step of the winter protocols was always consolidation. This was a strategic retreat, a shrinking of the castle's inhabited world. Entire sections of the sprawling complex, the North Tower, the guest halls, the chapel annex, even whole wings of the castle were formally abandoned. Their great doors were barred from the inside, and then sealed with heavy tapestries, animal hides, and even straw packed tightly into the cracks to prevent the precious warm air from escaping the core of the castle. The entire population of the castle, now numbering close to 150 souls, was concentrated into a few defensible core areas, primarily the Great Hall and the warren of small rooms and corridors immediately adjacent to the life-giving heat of the kitchen. By the end of February, reads a surviving account from a similar crisis at Kenilworth Castle. We had 63 souls of the lower household sleeping each night in the great hall. The stench of unwashed bodies, of sickness, and of fear was ungodly, but none among us dared to sleep apart, for we all knew that to be alone was to risk the cold. This consolidation wasn't just about sharing body heat, though that was certainly a primary factor. It was about a ruthless efficiency of fuel. It was far better to heat one single space adequately than to heat many spaces poorly. Victorian folklorist who was collecting local tales, he said the lord and lady of the castle themselves slept in the kitchen, right on the floor, on pallets no better than the ones used by the meanest servants. The cold, you see, makes equals of us all. Next came the implementation of a strict and unforgiving rationing system. Fuel, now more precious than gold, was the first commodity to be controlled. It was allocated by rank and by need, in a brutal but pragmatic triage. The night watchmen, who faced the most extreme conditions, received the largest share, enough for their small but essential braziers on the walls. The next largest share went to the kitchen, to cook what little food remained and to provide a baseline of warmth for the communal areas. A small, carefully measured amount was allocated to the single, communal fire in the Great Hall. No private chambers, not even the lord's new, cramped ones, received any fuel at all. All warmth was now a public utility. Food rationing was even more brutal and revealing of the medieval power structure. The lord's high table still received the best cuts of meat and the last of the wine, but the portions were drastically smaller. The servants saw their daily bread ration cut in half, supplemented by a thin, watery gruel. The only group, besides the nobles, who maintained their full rations were the guards on the walls. A man cannot fight the winter on an empty stomach, the steward noted grimly in his accounts. And a castle with weak guards is no castle at all. When the last of the carefully rationed firewood was finally gone, the truly desperate measures began. This is where the grim, medieval ingenuity born of pure necessity truly revealed itself. Bring me every single piece of furniture that is not currently being used for sleeping or eating, the steward ordered his weary staff. Chairs, benches, storage chests, decorative screens, even the intricately carved paneling from the walls of the abandoned chambers, anything made of wood that could burn was now considered fuel. It was a drastic, heartbreaking step. I saw Our Lady and herself weep openly as the men took their axes to the great, carved oak wardrobe that had been her own grandmother's wedding chest, a lady-in-waiting wrote in a secret diary. But none of us said a word, for we were all so very cold. When the last of the furniture had been consumed by the hungry fire, they began to burn anything and everything they could find. Old, worn-out tapestries, the handles from broken tools, and used door frames. Even the thick oak floorboards ripped up from the floors of the abandoned sections of the castle. And when that was all gone, the servants, using knowledge passed down from their own peasant ancestors, began to make their own fuel, crude, slow-burning cakes made from a mixture of dried horse dung, straw, and rendered animal fat. It smells unholy, like the very pits of hell, a young, noble squire complained, wrinkling his nose in disgust as the dung cakes smoldered and smoked in the hearth. But, he was forced to admit, it is far better than freezing to death. The most radical and transformative step was the decision to bring the livestock inside the castle's living quarters. The few remaining milk cows were moved from their frozen barns into the inner bailey, just outside the great hall. The pigs and the chickens were herded into the old, empty storage rooms directly off the kitchen. This wasn't just about saving the precious, irreplaceable animals from freezing to death, though that was certainly a primary consideration. It was a deliberate strategy to harness their collective body heat to help warm the human inhabitants. We slept with the chickens for a month, one account from a kitchen maid admits, with a tone of remembered embarrassment and gratitude. The small room was filled with feathers and filth and a terrible stink, but it was warm enough for us to live through the night. In the most desperate, final days of the crisis, the cows themselves were brought directly into the Great Hall, a move that would have been unthinkable, almost sacrilegious, under normal circumstances. The heat from their large bodies, and the steamy vapor of their breath, raised the temperature in the great, drafty space by several Life-saving degrees. The daily schedules of the castle were completely rewritten. Everyone, from the lord to the youngest scullery boy, rose at the first hint of gray light and went to their sleeping pallets at the moment of dusk. This strict, compressed schedule was designed to maximize the use of the precious, warmer daylight hours and to minimize the need for artificial light from expensive candles and additional heating during the longest, coldest parts of the day. It also meant that people were spending up to 16 hours a day in their beds, huddled together under shared piles of blankets, conserving both their body heat and their precious, dwindling calories. To combat the terrible psychological toll of the endless darkness, the claustrophobic crowding, and the gnawing hunger, the steward ordered the implementation of mandatory story circles each evening. As the castle's inhabitants huddled together around the single, small fire in the great hall, each person from the lord himself down to the most timid scullery boy was required to take a turn telling a story, sharing a memory, or singing a psalm. It was a brilliant and deliberate psychological strategy designed to maintain morale, to reinforce their bonds as a community, and to provide a brief, imaginative escape from the immediate, crushing hardships of their situation. In the final, most desperate days of the endless winter, when no fuel of any kind remained and the communal fire in the great hall finally died, they resorted to the last, most primal survival method of all, a living circle. The entire surviving population of the castle gathered in the very center of the vast, dark, and now freezing great hall. They sat down on the cold stone floor in a tight, dense, inward-facing circle, their bodies pressed together, back to back, side to side, old and young, noble and commoner, sharing their last and only resource, their collective body heat. They would rotate their positions every hour, with those on the cold, exposed outer edge of the circle moving into the warmer, protected center. They talked, they sang, and they prayed in continuous turns, a desperate strategy to keep each other from drifting off into the fatal, cold-induced sleep. This was the final defense, the last, silent, and deeply human act of communal survival when all other options had been completely exhausted. And then, one morning in late May, a miracle, the guard on the wall, his voice cracked and hoarse, shouted that he could see a patch of green grass on a distant, sun-facing hillside. The thick, stubborn ice on the moat finally cracked and broke apart with a sound like thunder. A young servant girl, sent out to search for firewood, returned with tears streaming down her face, clutching a single, impossibly beautiful, and stubborn snowdrop that she had found blooming at the base of the southern wall. The endless winter was finally, blessedly, breaking its grip. They had survived. Dawn breaks over the ancient castle walls. For the first time in what feels like a lifetime, the sunlight that spills across the frost-covered stone holds not just light, but a tangible, discernible promise of genuine warmth. A night watchman, our veteran friend Edwin, finishing his final shift of the long, brutal winter, pauses his weary pacing on the battlements. He closes his eyes, tilts his tired, chapped face upward, and turns it toward the strengthening sun, feeling its faint, miraculous heat on his skin. Made it through another one. He murmurs to himself, his voice a mixture of exhaustion, disbelief, and a profound, quiet wonder. His breath, for the first time in many months, no longer plumes in the air before him. That simple, understated statement, spoken into the peaceful morning air, represents the triumphant conclusion to a relentless, season-long war against an enemy that we, in our climate-controlled world, can barely begin to imagine. Surviving a medieval winter was not, as we might assume, a passive act of grim endurance. It was an active, relentless, and brilliantly ingenious fight, waged every single day and every single night. The magnificent four-poster bed was not a piece of decorative furniture. It was a personal, custom-built survival pod. The servants' chaotic, communal huddle was not a sign of squalor or a lack of breeding. It was a life-saving thermal strategy of remarkable efficiency. The watchman's lonely, endless, shuffling dance on the frozen ramparts was a conscious, deliberate, and often successful defiance of certain death. They fought the cold with a form of science. A science born not of abstract theory and written equations, but of brutal, direct, and lived experience. They didn't need to understand the principles of convection currents to know, with absolute certainty, that drawing a thick curtain around their bed trapped their body heat. They didn't need to understand the physics of thermal mass to know that the stone wall behind the bakery ovens was the warmest and most valuable place in the entire castle to sleep. Their knowledge was practical, hard-won, and passed down through countless generations, a form of wisdom written not in books, but in the language of pure survival. The enduring legacy of their long and desperate struggle is, in fact, all around us today, hidden in the very DNA of our modern, effortless comfort, the slow, centuries-long evolution from a smoky, inefficient open hearth in the center of a great hall to a proper fireplace with a chimney, a revolutionary invention that, for the first time, efficiently directed heat into a room while drawing smoke out was a process driven entirely by their desperate and ending need for more effective warmth. Our modern, comfortable, multi-layered beds are the direct and recognizable descendants of their curtained, fur-lined, and stone-warmed fortresses of fabric. Even the high-tech, chemically engineered insulation that is packed into the walls of our homes is a direct, if far more sophisticated, echo of the heavy, beautiful tapestries they hung on their freezing stone walls to trap a few precious degrees of heat. In a very real and direct sense, we sleep warm tonight because they fought so desperately, and so cleverly, to do the same. We are the beneficiaries of the accumulated wisdom of countless frozen nights, of countless small, ingenious innovations, and sadly, of countless lives that were lost to the cold, which in turn taught the living how to better survive the next inevitable winter.